In 2015, Nvidia was a gaming hardware company. By 2024, it became one of the most strategically important companies in the world, not because it built the best AI models, not because it owned the most data, not because it controlled social platforms, but because it controls the infrastructure that makes artificial intelligence possible. And in every technological revolution, infrastructure is power. This is how Nvidia positioned itself at the center of the AI economy. When most people think about AI, they think about ChatGPT, autonomous vehicles, or image generators. They don't think about electricity. They don't think about cooling systems. They don't think about silicon. But AI is not primarily a software revolution. It is a computational revolution. Training large language models requires billions of parameters and trillions of calculations. That requires specialized hardware, optimized for parallel processing at massive scale. And Nvidia had been building exactly that for decades. Originally for video games. What looked like a gaming GPU company was, in reality, building one of the most powerful parallel computing platforms in the world. The real turning point happened long before AI hype. In 2006, Nvidia launched CUDA. CUDA allowed developers to program GPUs for general-purpose computing. At the time, it was niche. But strategically, it was brilliant because hardware can be replaced. Ecosystems are harder to escape. CUDA created a developer dependency. Universities taught using Nvidia frameworks. Research papers optimized for Nvidia chips. AI startups built on Nvidia architecture. Switching became expensive, technically and economically. And in technology markets, switching costs create durable power. By the time deep learning breakthroughs accelerated in the 2010s, Nvidia was already embedded in research labs and data centers. When OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and others scaled model training, they didn't ask, "What chip should we use?" They asked, "How many Nvidia GPUs can we secure?" That is structural advantage, not brand dominance, not consumer loyalty. Infrastructure dependency. Cloud giants, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, built AI services on Nvidia hardware. Data centers were redesigned around Nvidia architectures. Entire AI frameworks optimized specifically for Nvidia performance. At that point, Nvidia wasn't just a supplier. It was the backbone. Startups couldn't negotiate. Cloud providers couldn't easily substitute. Governments competed for access. Scarcity turned infrastructure into leverage. And leverage turned Nvidia into a gatekeeper. There's a historical pattern here. During the gold rush, the most reliable profits weren't made by gold miners. They were made by those selling picks and shovels. Nvidia positioned itself as the supplier to the AI gold rush. When AI startups succeed, Nvidia sells chips. When AI startups fail, Nvidia still sold chips. When governments invest billions in AI sovereignty, Nvidia supplies the hardware. It benefits from industry growth, regardless of which application wins. That is strategic neutrality combined with structural dominance. AI is no longer just commercial, it is geopolitical. Export controls now restrict Nvidia's most advanced chips from being sold to certain countries. Governments see AI hardware as strategic infrastructure, which means Nvidia is no longer just a tech company. It sits at the intersection of technology, national security, supply chains, global trade. Few companies occupy that position. Infrastructure companies often become political actors, whether they intend to or not. But infrastructure dominance is not permanent. There are three structural risks. First, vertical integration. Google builds TPUs, Amazon builds Train IUM, Microsoft explores custom silicon. If hyperscalers reduce dependence, Nvidia's leverage weakens. Second, competition. AMD continues developing high-performance accelerators. Third, regulation and supply chain concentration. TSMC manufactures Nvidia's most advanced chips. That dependency introduces fragility. Infrastructure power is strong, but not invincible. Nvidia did not dominate AI by building the best chatbot. It's dominated by controlling the bottleneck. In complex systems, power accumulates at choke points. AI requires computation. Computation requires hardware. Hardware requires advanced fabrication. Nvidia positioned itself precisely where scarcity and scale intersect. That is not luck. That is strategic foresight. There's another way to understand Nvidia's position. Artificial intelligence is not a single product. It is a layered system. At the top, you have applications, chatbots, AI assistance image generators. Below that, you have foundation models. Below the models, you have machine learning frameworks. Below the frameworks, you have hardware. And at the bottom of that hardware layer, you have fabrication, companies like TSMC that physically manufacture the chips. Power in technology rarely sits at the top layer. It accumulates at structural bottlenecks. Applications compete with each other. Models evolve quickly. Frameworks change over time. But hardware infrastructure changes slowly and requires enormous capital that makes it durable. And durability in technology markets translates into leverage. Nvidia positioned itself not at the visible top of the AI boom, but in the structural middle where scaling becomes dependent. That is a far more stable position than building a single AI product. Because while applications rise and fall, infrastructure remains. But structural dominance always creates vulnerability. What happens if Nvidia's position weakens? If hyperscalers successfully build competitive in-house chips, dependency decreases. If alternative architectures outperform GPUs, the stack shifts. If geopolitical tensions disrupt semiconductor manufacturing, supply chains fracture. And if governments regulate AI hardware more aggressively, distribution becomes political. In other words, the same infrastructure that creates leverage can also create fragility. Because when an entire industry depends on a single layer, that layer becomes a systemic risk. And systemic risks eventually attract competition, regulation, or disruption. The real question is not whether Nvidia dominates today. It clearly does. The real question is whether AI infrastructure will remain centralized or fragment into multiple competing architectures. History suggests that no dominant infrastructure remains unchallenged forever, but timing matters. And for now, Nvidia remains at the center of the AI economy, not because it builds the most visible products, but because it controls the layer others cannot easily replace. When we look at technological revolutions, we often focus on visible products. But history shows that the companies controlling infrastructure shape the real outcome. The AI boom may produce thousands of applications, but as long as they depend on Nvidia's architecture, Nvidia remains central to the system. And in industry, dependency is the highest form of power. This is the industry code.